I am a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie. But I decided to actually change the topic a little bit. The one thing that I've noticed when I get in front of people is I typically go way over the head of most people in the audience. And so I decided that I'm going to come up with some ideas that literally anybody can do with minimal technical ability that will help you automate your intake process. And so those are going to be broken down into a couple of different categories. But the couple of things that I want to first go over is that along the journey that I've been doing this for 14 years, I ended up meeting a guy named Jim Hacking at a conference similar to this one, where one of my clients had won a competition, and Jim and I had gotten connected, and we've been working together ever since on automating his firm. So a couple of things to note. 15 million minutes roughly translates into $2.5 million at $10 an hour. So it's a little bit, it's not like insignificant numbers that we're talking about here. And one thing I want to point out is that when I go about implementing automation in a small business, one of my primary objectives are going to be the following. Like, I like to be able to save time. Like, above all else, time savings can come from multiple aspects when you implement this type of automation in a practice like what you guys have. The second thing that I like to look for is how do we reduce or eliminate the likelihood of an error or a problem or a mistake from happening. Increasing speed, Jim harps about this regularly, is the faster that you can make things happen, it kind of directly correlates to the amount of money that you can make, because it removes the friction that might be involved with getting somebody to take action on one of your offers or moving through a process that you have in your business. Making more money, usually when you do things more consistently, it means that you have more chances at bat, and therefore you have a lot higher likelihood of hitting a home run. And then one thing that's starting to come into effect a lot more often is the scalability of a process along the way. And lastly, when you go through all this type of thought process for your systems in your business, specifically with intake, it allows you to kind of craft an experience for your clients as opposed to just shoving them through a process and making them come out the other side. So it can be something that is enjoyable for you, for your team, and for your clients to be able to experience a well-organized, a well-thought-out process, and we use automation to make that possible. So there's 7 tool categories that I like to break down. The first of which is going to be, and this is the most important, so I'm starting right out the gates. I'm not going to make you wait to the end to find out what my favorite, most powerful technique for automating a small law firm is going to be. It's a scheduling tool, and it sounds very simple, but I can tell you, as having been the client of attorneys, having worked with attorneys, enough of them to know that your scheduling game is weak. Generally across the board, but I'll just go ahead and say that it's something that can be leveled up. And I'm going to borrow some ideas for you from other spaces that I've been in that are not just legal. So two-way messaging, if you guys are not using some kind of two-way communication for both, I recommend email and text messaging, but we're going to get into that. Document signing during your intake process. Being able to get a document signed easily is very important. So we also have form tools, how to collect payments, using a CRM, and then we're going to talk about middleman integration applications. All right, so with your scheduling tools, the most important thing is everyone comes and thinks of it like, oh, I'm going to set up a meeting for 15 minutes with somebody, send them a link, let them pick a time. And that's kind of like an arbitrary way to look at it. And you may have used them for yourself personally, for your own appointments, or use it for different things. But a couple of different ideas that you might have in terms of flexibility is that your intake people, if you have an intake person or a receptionist in your office that kind of serves in that function, they could benefit from being able to set up their intake calls with your clients with a scheduling link. It doesn't have to be just you. And everybody in your office that has to have meetings with either prospective new clients or your current client base can use these tools to effectively save time, create a repeatable situation for every appointment type that you might have in your practice. So I mentioned intake calls. You could, if you guys are doing consultations, I know there's been some back and forth on whether or not those are something you need, but consultations can be used to schedule with these scheduling links. You can use it to schedule appointments with new hires. You can use it to host webinars or client appreciation events. If you're doing any kind of preparation for depositions or mediation, you can have your depo prep meetings scheduled with these scheduling tools. So one of the other things I want to talk about is that this is relatively affordable You can send these links out to people. It's a very repeatable experience. The one thing that happens when you use a scheduling tool is it creates a triggering situation. So if someone schedules an appointment, then that means that they need to have a confirmation sent to them. It means that they need to be reminded that appointment's going to happen. And then ideally, if that appointment results in a certain way, you might want to follow up with them afterwards. It's very easy to integrate these into pretty much any software stack, whether you're using Lead, Docket, Filevine, Clio, Clio Grow, Lawmatics, whatever you're using. It's very easy to plug these types of scheduling tools and have it work with your existing technology. You can have pooled availability. So in the intake process, if you have 2 or 3, more than one person that handles a specific task, but it doesn't have to be them, you can just make a pooled availability. So you end up with a situation where if you have a time slot that's available and one of your 3 resources is available to use that time, that you have the ability to do that. And then lastly, with this, and this is something that I've seen happen, but if you send a Microsoft 365 like Outlook invite or a Google Calendar invite, it takes way less time to just set up an appointment using your own scheduling links internally. So if your intake person needs to set an appointment with you, rather than going into Outlook and trying to find a time slot, you can just use your scheduling links internally. So the best tools that I like by far is Acuity or Squarespace scheduling. It's going to be the best bang for the buck. And if you work with someone like me, it's the best. But if you don't work with someone like me, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. So that's why Calendly comes in the mix. It's a little bit easier to use and a little bit easier to get set up. And then there's about a million other options that you could use if you already have one. That's good enough. But if you are looking for a solution, Squarespace scheduling, you could have everybody in your office using the scheduling tool for less than $36 a month. Two-way messaging is kind of the next topic that we're going to be talking about. And at the minimum, you need to be able to send email, which probably is covered. But you may not have the ability to automate sending email. So you need to, whoa. There's that nerves. Okay, but automate sending email. So I like to use either with Zapier in conjunction with MailChimp or email marketing platform like that. It's easy to automate those types of communications. But instead of sending them from just a random email address, you might choose to use them to facilitate or the beginning of a conversation. So you're soliciting a response to an email rather than clicking a link and going to a website and reading something. And the same can be applied for text messaging. And text messaging is probably even more important than email nowadays. And so it's important to think about, does your existing phone system, if you're using Zoom or RingCentral or Google Voice, you have the ability to send text messages using those applications. But the one thing that's a little bit weird is how do I automatically send one of those text messages to one of my clients? So if you have someone on your website that is filling out your contact us or consultation form, rather than hoping for the best, having them come to your system, give them a call to try to set up an appointment with you, why don't you send them a text message with a link that client can then specify when they want to meet with you. And based on so it's a mutual, it creates a situation where you're communicating with your recipient in a medium in which they're comfortable with. And then of course, there's some firms out here that have different, if you're big on social media, you need to think about what those particular applications look like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, yada, yada, yada. There are ways to go about managing those interactions within your platform. And so kind of the big takeaway from the two-way texting, or the two-way messaging platforms is you want to start thinking about how that might work. Specifically with SMS, it's only going to get more important as time goes on. The third, most important thing that I think is important to talk about with automation, it creates kind of a similar situation where you have tools that you can use to assist or reduce the amount of time it takes to do something. So form tools are going to be a paramount thing that I've implemented in a number of different firms that I've been working with, from getting someone on your website to come into your CRM, or doing something more elaborate, like when a brand new client signs up and we need to collect details about their specific case or whatever that might be. We are providing an organized and easy to use feature that we can use to collect that type of data. So a couple of ideas: you can throw these specialty form tools up on your website. You can use them to handle your intake calls. So instead of writing them down on pieces of paper or filling out custom fields in your CRM, you can just use a form tool that will collect them in the information that you want in the order that you want it, in the required fashion, how you want it, conditionally, I guess would be the way to say it. Let's see, what else we got here. Okay, so in addition to that, you can also build call scripts like into your form tool. So like if you answer the phone, thank you for calling XYZ company, this is Kelsey, how can I help you, or whatever that might be, you can build that scripting experience at the same time collect the information that you need for that call. So a couple form tools that I like to use that are very flexible that work with other stuff. The first of which is Typeform. It's very pretty. It's kind of expensive, but it's a very flexible and easy to use tool. Jotform is another application that's super easy to use. It's easily the best bang for the buck. It's HIPAA compliant, if some of you guys have to worry about that. And it also has the ability to do some document generation. It's like a secret feature of it, which is kind of handy. And then lastly, if you have like some more sophisticated or hardcore data collection requirements, it's worthwhile to look at a tool called Cognitoforms. Specifically if you have like long or like inconsistent data sets like someone's address history or employment history or their criminal history or whatever that might be, where some people might only have one and another person might have 10 places that they've lived in the past 10 years or whatever that might be. All right, so this is something that is probably obvious, but I've received enough paper invoices in the mail to know that it's probably not universal, but providing a way, if you need to collect payment from a client, give them an easy way to do that. And ideally, if you were to tie it into some of the other stuff that we're talking about, it can kind of trigger like a magic type of moment. So eliminate and this is really silly that I have to say this, but I've had to pay with checks recently to an attorney. And it was an unpleasant experience. It took forever, and I'm lazy, and I don't want to mail a check. So like providing an easy way for them to do that is super important. So one of the last things we were talking about is a CRM. And the CRM is what was going to be able to be used to put all of this stuff together. It's a little tricky to implement. I mean, if anyone's had a go at implementing a CRM in their practice, it's a little bit more outside of the box than some of the other stuff that I've mentioned. But it would be, if we were to take any of these things that we talked about, you could take any individual one and kind of go about a process of implementing just that, like just scheduling tools, or if maybe we want to take it so whenever we sign up a new client, we want to send them our onboarding form. Those are going to be kind of what you're looking at. Did I miss document signing? Dang. Did I miss that? Sorry, I'm missing a slide, I think. Yeah, all right. Well, document signing's in there somewhere along the line. I meant to talk about it, so I will take a minute. So a lot of you guys use Adobe Sign, FileVines, a VineSign tool, a variety of different signature applications. It's important to think about how you might use those. So if you have an appointment that gets scheduled online via Acuity or Calendly, and you're going to be trying to talk to that client about becoming a client, or prospective new client to becoming a client, we need to be able to facilitate that. And so having the ability to easily provide them with a way to become a client is kind of where that document signing process is worth thinking about how you can put that into your intake situation. So if you're sitting there talking to a client and they need to sign face-to-face, that's one consideration. The other might be, especially in the last 18 to 2 years with COVID, being able to remote sign a new client has probably become very critical. So having the ability to send a link to them where they can either complete a form and it is the equivalent of signing a representation agreement, or if it's going to be an actual tool. One thing that I mentioned, or that I did not mention in here, is that PandaDoc, if you're in a sales process, is going to be a lot more flexible for the purposes of selling. So back to the CRM. I knew I missed something, so I do apologize. But kind of what you want to think about with CRM, there's a lot of different vendors here that are offering some kind of CRM solution that's specific for law. I intentionally use Pipedrive because it's not for that purpose. So any clients that I work with, I like to refer and recommend Pipedrive as a solution. And the main reason is that it's not focused on like doing law, it's focused on selling stuff. And so since you guys are selling legal services, it can be adopted to serve that purpose. It's also very flexible and can kind of combine all the different things that I've talked about into one kind of uniform experience as far as intake is concerned. So the last kind of high-level thing that we're going to talk about is each one of these items can be built and implemented individually. And so if you did that, how do you make them all tie together and work together? And so there's a couple of different options that you have. You could have a really badass process internally that you guys like to use. In addition to that, you could also roll with solutions like Zapier or Integromat, or since I'm sure how many Microsoft 365 users are in the room? Yeah, probably half of everybody or more. Microsoft actually has a solution called Power Automate, and if you're a Microsoft 365 user, that you probably have access to this account, and you can probably mess around with a couple of things without having to spend any more money. And it works really good with automating things within the Microsoft family of applications. But Zapier and Integromat are kind of like, from like level of difficulty and accessibility, Zapier is going to be far easier to get help with. It's going to be far easier to find resources. Integromat is less expensive, but it can be a little tricky to use. But these are the tools that I use to wrap all this stuff together into one smooth, frictionless process, or as frictionless as possible. And so when you're thinking about the purposes of automating your intake, you need to break it down into chunks. And those chunks are going to be more or less broken down into like meeting with clients, getting them to sign, who's dealing with those people, and these tools that I've mentioned are all going to be used to support like that infrastructure. So I'm going to open it up for any questions if anyone has anything. I know I went kind of fast and all over the place, it seems like. But those are kind of low-tech. Each one of those things should be low-tech enough without any technical background, but a good systems mindset. You should be able to roll out and think about how you might get those going. I would say the scheduling tool, because it's going to, for every new person you add to your office, it's going to make their time more efficient. And for every new client, like every experience, like the example is like just getting a new client, like even if it's an existing client, to get them to come in and meet with you or have a phone call with you, you can use that tool to facilitate that experience. So from your client's perspective, it's easy for them to find a time that works for both of you. And for you, it makes sure that they have a confirmation. The likelihood of them showing up to that appointment and not wasting even more time is there. And then you're not doing the whole back and forth like, hey, does 6 o'clock work? Well, what about 2 o'clock on Wednesday? And that's, I mean, it sounds arbitrary, but it's easily the most, and then it's also the best framework, like if you need to build off of that. Like what happens after that appointment's over? Like did they sign up or did they not sign up or whatever? And you can build around it. And so by successfully implementing that, the only thing you really need to think about is how many people do I need to do this for? And then what are the appointment types that I want to use in my business? And that's probably the most, like if there's one thing you take away from me, implement a scheduling tool if you're not using it. And if you are using one, think about all the other ways that you're not using it that you could be using it. It's probably, all right, any other questions? Medical authorizations. So I've messed around with a couple different tools for that. I built Jot forms that are like linked with Chart Squad or linked with medical authorization forms. And basically it's just like a basic form that they fill out and then a signature spot. And those match to a PDF. The other option you could do is build, I think in Adobe Sign you can make a form, quote unquote, that it serves as the document. So it's like literally a link you can send to anybody. It'll be a blank document, but they'll be able to fill it out and have it attributed to them. And so that would be a way to do it with Adobe Sign. PandaDoc is that option that I mentioned, and you can do that exact type of workflow. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, me personally, what I would say, I mean, I lean heavier on the best-in-class like option for each of these things, but like there's something to be said about like an application that has everything all in one. And so I don't think that there's a good all-in-one solution at the moment. And so I wouldn't box myself out in that way, but you might choose to supplement if you can. I mean, I haven't messed around with Lawmatics in a while, but if I recall, they have an API. It's kind of flexible in that way. So you might combine it with some of the strategies that we talked about if you're not willing to go down like all in on best in class of everything, if that makes sense. But that's it for my time. So, but I'll be here for the rest of the time. So if anyone has any questions, feel free. I'm a resource for Max Law. I've been participating in the Facebook group forever, and I enjoy doing this more than